All right.
We're live.
Thank you, everyone, for joining our webinar and panel today, the ROI of sustainability, how real-time building insights drive performance. Uh, First of all, just to introduce myself, my name is Dan Lake. I'm going to be the moderator for the discussion today. A little bit about myself. I've got 10 plus years of experience in the energy efficiency and smart building space. I've been working with Measurable since the acquisition of Hatch Data in 2022. Just to do a little bit of housekeeping, please submit your questions through the Q&A feature, and we'll do our best to address them during the panel or as a follow-up to this webinar offline. Now, I just want to quickly go through our agenda. All right, great, thanks. So first of all, we'll go into a little bit of context on why we're here today, why this discussion is important. And then we'll hear a couple highlights from our panelists and their work with Measurable. Then we'll move on to our panel discussion. And then finally, we're going to touch briefly on Measurable's custom savings report and how we can help you progress in your journey in this. So just to introduce our panel, we have Sal Dragone, Principal and Director of Property Management from Rubenstein Partners, Phil Bing, Director of Engineering with Unico, and then lastly, we have Mike Wiltshire, Senior Account Executive and with Measurable. Mike's got over 10 years of experience in the industry, supporting some of our largest enterprise customers, such as Rubenstein and Unico, but others such as Boston Properties as well. So first of all, I just want to kind of set the stage in terms of why we're having this discussion, why you're all here today and why this is so important. There's an urgent need for smarter, more efficient buildings, with over 30% of energy used in commercial buildings being wasted according to the EPA. 25% of all US buildings will be subject to building performance standards by 2026, with 13 already in force and 30 plus planned. And then lastly, with energy, one of the most controllable costs for commercial office buildings, making up 20 to 30% of the total operating expenses. Just a little introduction to Measurable. Many of you already know us as a leading global platform used to track, measure, and report on sustainability data. But we also help our customers improve building operations through our optimized solution. So now I want to turn it over to Phil from Unico to talk a little bit about how Unico has worked with Measurable over the years. Phil?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Great. Well, thanks for the introduction, Dan, and thanks for having me. You talked about, you've been there since Hatch in 2022 and Measurable when you guys merged and made that brand change. Unico partnered with Measurable, formerly Hatch, and actually formerly Internoc over a decade ago. We actually had a client that used the product. We're a real estate owner operator, but also we do some third-party services, and the client we were working with implemented it. So we got to use the product firsthand, and our sustainability team, along with our engineering and operations team, decided to be something that we wanted to roll out across the company. And we didn't know for sure if this was going to be the program we were going to use, so we test piloted a handful of them. And Measurable, again, formerly Hatch, kind of stood out to us from user interface perspective, as well as cost was competitive with some of the other programs that were out there, and it just felt like they were kind of ahead of the game, and it was something that we could put in place day one, and the operators, whether they've never used a similar program or had been around them most of their career, could dive in and start getting feedback from the program right away. So we rolled it out to probably a half a dozen buildings at first. And now I'd say probably 30 to 40% of our assets that we own and operate have this implemented. We had some pretty hurdles that we'll probably get into later and some Q&A about getting this pushed across just from the asset manager's position. We'd been a company that didn't have this in any of our assets, and then all of a sudden we wanted to implement it, and we were pretty headstrong on it. So we were given some pretty significant target goals if we were going to implement this, pretty big savings that were tied to the success of the of it rolling out and using it in our assets. And we not only met those but exceeded those savings year over year. And again, still over a decade later, still use the program. Still are finding savings and measures on a very regular basis. Weekly, we discuss them in our monthly operations calls. So it's really ingrained in our DNA now. It's part of our policies and procedures if you have the program to use it. And we're still excited to partner with now Measurable, and yeah, happy to be here.
Great. Thanks, Phil. I appreciate that. Now I'll hand it over to Sal to talk a little bit about how Rubenstein has worked with Measurable over the years.
Hi, everybody. And thank you for that as well, Dan. He looks similar to Phil. I guess for us, it was when it was Enernoc. So how did we go back 15 years, maybe? But what started for us, it was more about our need to just understand what's happening at a particular building we had. We had a building that was just didn't make sense in terms of the cost of electric and the actual use of electric. We were very dependent on the BMS system alone and simply saying, all right, no, the BMS says the unit's turning on or the unit's turning off. But in working with the tenant and the building engineers, we discovered that no, there's something not right here. And our only course of action back then was to get the data from the utility company. But if you back then, that was dot matrix type printer information, and trying to read through that was just crazy. You actually had to hire somebody who knew what the hell they were reading about, and try to understand when your power was being used or what the demand was. And it was at that time, coupled with another building that we had in DC, that I met with the folks at Enernoc, and they said we have a product here that can help you see the overnights and see everything on a 15-minute interval, truly understand when you're using power real time. I was skeptical at the time whether or not this would actually be helpful for us. Matter of fact, I believe it was Marty who I was talking to at the time, and I think I made a deal with him that I said I'll pay you if I actually save money, and we did. And that was a long time ago, but now we have really grown through the years. Where whether it was Enernoc to an L to a Hatch to now Measurable, the system has just continued to grow over the years, like the company has, to where we have every property now has Measurable overseeing the systems, to a point where even on my my statements, I call it the EMS. This is my energy management system, where any manager, any engineer, any of us can go at any time and look at the building and see how we're using power, what our demand hits are, get a good idea for any type of efficiencies we put in place, whether it is a new BMS system or a different strategy. We can actually see our efforts immediately, and that's just become critical. I don't know how you can operate buildings today without having that kind of data, as well as other data that you get from other systems. So yeah, it's been a great run, and I look forward to many more years. But it is truly coming down to, if you want to be able to run a building today, you need to understand where your dollars are going. And if you want to create a strategy, you need to understand how to implement that going forward. And it's been a great success.
Great. Thanks, Sal. I really appreciate that. Now I want to shift over to our panel. This is going to be a open dialogue, both with our panelists as well as those of you watching. So as I said before, please drop your questions into the Q&A. We'll keep an eye on it, and we'll weave those questions in as we're going through, or follow up offline afterwards as necessary. So first, let's start talking about ROI and savings, really the foundation of measuring performance and where impact is easiest to see. Starting with you, Sal, and we can go back and forth, of course. With energy being one of the largest operating expenses in real estate, how do you see operational savings contributing to NOI and overall asset management, or asset value? Sorry.
Well, as you just mentioned, Dan, it represents 20 to 30% of our operating budget in most cases. The operating expenses, I should say, related to the property, which is the direct contributor to NOI. If you can keep that number in check, years ago, let me back up. Years ago, the goal was to reduce that number, right? You reduced it by changing out your lighting to LED or new air conditioning, whatever you did to the building, you would invest in the building and say, all right, in return, I'm going to save energy and there's my return on investment. So if I spend $1,000 here, maybe I get, a couple $100 in savings or something like that. Today, it's a little bit different. Today, I think most buildings have done a lot of the implementation with the LED lighting and variable speed drives and over the course of the last 10 years, a lot of investment in HVAC just comes naturally as systems, do need to get changed over time. So now the focus more about is how you use your power, rather than how much power you use. Making sure that you're tracking your demand, that you're utilizing or running the building efficiently, from a when versus to a simply, what type of, engine do I have running inside the building, if that makes sense. So it's critical. You got to continue doing it, especially what did I just look at over the last 5 years, we've seen, well, between 22 and 23, I believe it was, I think 10, 12% increases in electric rates. And we're continuing to see them. And with the demand out there, these rates are not getting any lower quickly, if they are at all. So you need to just continuously monitor how you're using power beyond the low-hanging fruit of a light bulb.
And Phil, how do you look at that with Unico?
Yeah, a lot of similarities there. Like what Sal said, we have a commercial 31 district from our local utility rate, which saw a 22% increase just last year alone. So it was a really big hit. We're still coming out of a pretty tough time for our market, especially in our commercial office, downtown core properties. Tenancy is a little bit lower. The leasing's a lot more competitive, and being able to keep those operating expenses in line and be competitive with your neighbor is key to landing tenants and keeping existing, tenants in the building. And I'll say, yeah, I think like what Sal touched on is a lot of the low-hanging fruit stuff has been addressed over the years. So now what are we doing? What's the next step? What are we doing to continue the efficiency and to keep using this program? And a lot of it is still simple items. I'd still call it low-hanging fruit, where uh, you have the old school mentality that, a building has to start using electricity at 3 in the morning in order to keep your occupants happy. And with the program that's there, we're realizing that that's not the case. So we can start the building at 6 a.m. and still achieve the same desired comfort set points for the occupants, and then show the tenants as we're having our surveys in the middle of the year, what we're doing. And hey, if you haven't noticed, you haven't been complaining about your space, but these costs are actually, 5, 10 cents a square foot lower than they were this time last year or the year before.
Phil, you make an interesting point there that the value for you isn't just straight sort of savings, direct return, but also sort of competitive ability helps you guys compete in the marketplace. That's an interesting point that I think is worth just highlighting, that it's again not just a straight dollar return, but it's something that you guys see as a competitive advantage in the market.
Yeah, and even furthermore to add to that, it was touched on earlier about some of the compliance pathways that either cities have already implemented or are implementing. Those can have some pretty stringent
Yeah.
fines that are passed back through to the tenants if not achieved. And so to have a platform like this where you can say, we don't think we're going to get to that point because we're managing our energy. We're not going to get those fines that we pass back through to you guys. It gives the prospective tenant or the current tenant a lot more comfort to stay in our building or lease from us because of that.
Yeah, it's mitigating costs, right? I mean, you're right, Phil. There some of these cities have really hefty fines, and so it's not even just reducing your energy costs; it's also avoiding penalties. Something, Mike, let's go back to real quick. While this isn't true everywhere because every market's different, in a lot of markets, rents have not been going up over the last couple of years, if not 3 years. I don't know if they're going down. I don't think I've seen that, but your rents have been pretty stagnant, but cost increase. And that hits your NOI. I mean, that's a direct hit to your NOI. So in this market, you've got to watch everything. And the energy costs, again, being such a large item, you got to find ways to go ahead and curb that energy cost, because the income's not going up.
Great. So, Phil, let's talk a little bit about the program itself, because you did touch on that. In your mind, what's needed to make an energy management program like this truly work in practice? How has using a platform like Optimize supported sustained results over time for you and Unico?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, you've got to see results. You can't implement a program that costs money and takes time and doesn't provide results. But in order to get the results, I think one of the biggest hurdles for us in the beginning was getting the buy-off from the operators and the folks at the company that they're going to use the program. And we created some pretty tough, you know, I'd say policies around that. Next to our name or our job description where it talks about an operator or build an engineer, can you lift 50 pounds or can you be on your feet for longer than 2 hours on a time? It's a bullet point in our emergency response plan and our policies and procedures that you will use the program if it's implemented at your property. And not, you need that buy off from people to believe in it and to want to use it. You could install it all day long, but if you're not logging in and taking the measures seriously and taking action and then sharing the wins and sharing, maybe a measure that wasn't a win. It was addressed, but it was popped up, but sharing that. So every month we get together and not to shame people, but we have a list of all the measures that are on there. Everybody has to speak to them, talk about it. And it's not to call them out or say, hey, you ran your building inefficiently last weekend. What's going on? It's so that the person sitting at the other end of the table can say, ooh, I better go back to my my system and double check that I haven't done the same thing. I forgot it's a holiday coming up. I forgot that, you know, um, a really good example of this was a lot of our lease structures require us or have language in there that will run the building for short hours on the weekend, on Saturday or Sunday because of the tenant. And that's in the lease language, and we will absolutely do that at no extra cost. But especially during the pandemic and even prior to it, we reached out to a lot of our tenants and we said, these costs are getting passed back through to you guys. Are you guys using this on the weekends? You have you have the legal right to use it at no additional cost. It's in your lease, but you're paying for it if you're not there. Can we do something where either we have an override button that you can hit and turn it on if you're there, or you schedule it with us in advance, and otherwise we'll default to it being off and we'll pass those savings back across to you? And that was an example that was shared at one of our monthly meetings where we're trying to get buy off on this. And everybody across the table said, well, that's a great idea. Why don't we go back and ask our property manager, ask, our asset manager, is that something we can implement at our building? And I don't think there was one no. I don't think anyone said, no, we don't want to save money. We don't, just keep running it, even though we're not here. So sharing that, getting the buy off on it is really key. And then you've got to be able to share the wins with the asset managers, the decision makers, so that they see that their investment is actually returning savings and having a positive impact on the overall operations budget.
Right. And Sal, what have you seen that's made this kind of program work for you all at Rubenstein?
Well, I agree with everything, Phil said. It's, you implement this, and that's great. You're motivated. You want to save money. You want to see what's going on with the properties. But unless people are using it, then it becomes useless, right? So, per Phil's comment, you need to make sure that people are using it. I will tell you, years ago, it was looked as though we were looking over the engineer's shoulder, like this is management, big brother. To where today it's not, because of proper training and showing them that it can help them. I think Phil said something really important there, which is if something went wrong at a building, you didn't sit there and scold a manager or a team for screwing up or not making the change. No, it's the opposite. You say, all right, saw that happen. How can we stop it from happening again? What caused it? Make it a learning experience and show the team that this is a tool for them to manage the energy inside our buildings. It shouldn't be a scorecard or a way to find out if people are doing a bad or operating the building poorly.
Mhm.
And yes, you should if you are finding savings or you have found ways to go ahead and make your building more efficient and increase profitability, you should absolutely promote that with the ownership, whether it be first party ownership, third party ownership, whatever it may be. That's what we do for a living, right? I run property. And there's nothing wrong with saying, look, we've done this with the help of these people. I do, as part of my annual presentation, I've got the measurable logo in my presentation as one of the partners that we have to curb expenses. It shows that, we're using technology to be the best we can be. So it's part of the overall plan.
Yes, I think we see that more broadly from the measurable customer base, where it starts off, the really successful customers have that organizational alignment, the executive level support initially. But as the program rolls out and expands, we've seen the engineers really take and run with
Yeah.
it. And, you get some of those folks, taking measures and really using it as, to their own advantage to be able to promote themselves in the company and show the results and successes. And I think that sort of reinforces the program over time, for both you guys and other clients we've seen, where that sort of evolves and it becomes, sort of part of the culture and part of the structure. So it's a great point that, it's sort of a both top down and bottom up approach. I think that yields success in the long run.
Let me just add to that, Mike. It's important for me that if I roll out something new, a program like this, again, we've had it for a long time, but you always get new buildings, that you don't just say, hey, here, this is for you. Why don't I actually look at it at least 2, 3 times a week for my entire portfolio of 104 buildings. Do I look at every building intently every day? No, but I go through the measures. And then I also think it's really important that, the quarterly meetings that the team has directly, with your team, right? It just reinforces that they're learning. It's not just, quote, the boss is looking at this. Here, I'm working with the company to see what happened and what changes we can make.
So I want to pull a little bit at something, Mike. Obviously, we're talking a lot here with Phil and Sal about commercial office buildings and those kind of assets. But beyond office assets, this is for you, Mike, what other property types benefit from building optimization and some of the stuff the solutions that we offer at Measurable?
Yeah, absolutely. Office is obviously a great fit, because you've got control over the major equipment systems in the buildings, and that's generally an important criteria. But we do see success among other verticals. One, for example, is with some grocery chains. We've been working with the Wise Markets folks for a number of years to help them manage their demand, and actually participate in demand response, where they'll leverage the tools to actually control their HVAC and lighting during high demand events. And that's shown tremendous results for them. So there are certainly other verticals I think that can take advantage of it. One other use case we also see are folks that are implementing capital projects, regardless of the property type, and using it for measurement and verification, to see how is the building performing before implementing a project, and what were the results after, and did you actually see the expected results? And in some cases, folks are able to get utility incentives using that data as well. So there are a number of different use cases, depending on the asset type, that can be applicable, and would be happy to explore that for anybody that's interested.
Thanks, Mike. So let's change gears a little bit here. We've talked about outcomes and what fuels them, but let's talk about how we use data to drive meaningful action. So Phil, I'd like to hear a little bit from you in terms of, with real-time interval data giving deeper visibility, do you have any examples where Unico or your team operators and whatnot have been able to uncover an issue that you've seen, and how has it changed operations with your team?
Yeah. There's a few that kind of stand out. One of them is, and I touched on it a little bit ago, we had an operator at a building that had been there for a long time. He retired with us a couple years ago. Wonderful operator. He came to us with the building, And when we got there, he had a similar building system, lighting, HVAC, than in the rest of our portfolio. It wasn't anything unique or out of line, but we noticed that his utilities were on average 10, 11, 12 cents a square foot higher than some of the other properties. We first looked into tenancy. Was there some tenants in the building that were just higher users, and we didn't see that. But what we found was just the operation of the building, because he was, customer service was really important to him. He had a really good relationship after 20 years in the building, wanted the tenants to be comfortable. He was starting the building really early, to try to make sure that it was either warm or cool, depending on the time of year. And once we implemented Internock back then, we could see what was happening at that time, and he was really resistant to make any changes at first, and so we just made like incremental changes, like, hey, well, let's do it 30 minutes later. Let's do it. Okay, that worked. Your building still got to temperature. Let's do it an hour later. We wanted to make sure that he felt comfortable with the changes he was making. We weren't, big brothering him, but we noticed that one of the things that he could do is, it was a 20-story building. If he started, and it had various supply fans throughout the building, if he started the mid-rise portion of the building at the time that he wanted, but left the high-rise and low-rise portion to come on closer to lease hours, we could see an immediate drop in utility usage, and we could correlate it to what the temperature was in the building from his BMS trends to what the energy usage was, and not wait 30 days to get a utility bill. And he kind of had, eyes wide open. He was really happy with it. And, eventually he was on board, and he was one of our biggest advocates for using the program. That's just one of many examples. We've also seen it actually help save equipment. We had a building that we still own and still use the software at, that was turning a chiller on at night, on and off, on and off, on and off. And there was no operator there to know that this was happening. And when we got the measure given to us, we brought our chiller technicians in, and the chiller tech said the fact that we found this when we did probably saved the life of the chiller, and probably saved us a six-figure cost in damaging that piece of equipment from it starting and stopping at night. When it went into this kind of like low mode, it still had some demand, but it didn't need to start a chiller. It could have done it with a different program. So those are two examples where one of them was energy savings, and the other one was saved us a lot of money and potentially ruining or damaging a piece of equipment.
That's great. And so really we're talking about having that real-time visibility into the data and operations of the building, allowing you to really connect, what your operators are doing in real time with the data, as opposed to, like you were saying, just waiting till the next end of the next billing period to find out, what you've done over the last month has done. Sal, any specific examples that come to mind for you in terms of, I know you've mentioned in the past talking about sort of due diligence and understanding buildings and really jumping in and being able to see right away, but any specific examples that come out for you?
Well, I mean, look, they're very similar to Phil's. And we have lots of examples where, by looking at the data, whether on the 15-minute interval or as a benchmark, it makes a difference. The one that always sticks out in my mind is almost identical to Phil's, in the sense that, we think that we have control of the building through the BMS. It shuts down at 6 o'clock, it comes on at 6 o'clock, whether it works Saturday or not. But later to find out, when you take a look at it, wait a minute, so what popped on at 11 o'clock at night? Why is the chiller running? Why is the air handler running? And we would have never seen that. Again, I'm trying not to make this a commercial about measurable, but it's whether it's you guys or somebody else, right? When you
Right.
have the ability to see what's happening, really see what's happening in a building, and then you can go in there. And in our case, we found out that the temperature sensors were off. Right, one was doing one side of the building, one was doing the other side of the building. This could have been going on for years, prior to us even owning the building, but at nighttime it would warm up, and so the chiller would kick on. I'm like, well, okay, yeah, but the side that was warming or getting cool was the cold side, right? And then the heater would want to kick on. It was an absolute disaster what was happening, but we would have not seen that without the overnights. But I'm going to take it one step further, Dan, as you mentioned. What this has really done is it allows you to learn, right? I mean, I had no clue, or I should say, I didn't have this sense of knowledge in terms of energy use 15 years ago, right? because as you're getting more information, you're asking more questions. As you're able to benchmark building by building, floor by floor in some buildings, you can see things that you didn't see before, right? Like any good graph, right? I can make a graph look really great, or I can make it really look terrible. But when you compare two graphs of similar over top of each other, you say, wait, why is this building still running at 150 kilowatt hours at night while the other building's only running at 25? Something's still on in that building that we're not catching. And that's happened several times for us.
So we had a question come in, and I thought it might be relevant to something we've talked about earlier, and that's something you've mentioned in the past, Phil, which is how something like a triple net lease comes into play with a product like this. Where it may not be, the leasing structure may not be as obvious around operating costs. How do you guys address those? Maybe starting with you, Phil.
So the question regarding how do we address, can you kind of clarify what your question is there?
Sure. Sorry about that. So when we're talking about where a tenant, where the leasing structure may not be as straightforward, where you're not necessarily um, absorbing all of the costs, how do the different leasing structures change how you're considering using a program like Optimize in your buildings?
Well, there's a lot of other factors that go into it for us, regardless of the leasing structure, because we do certify most of our buildings LEED silver, gold, or platinum. We have met quite a few other compliance criteria, like I mentioned in the beginning, in the markets that we're in. So in general, it's still important to us, the costs that are getting passed back through the tenant, be it a triple net lease or fully grossed lease, are getting passed back through the tenants. There are tenants that are sub-metered, and so they're paying for a portion of their electricity, either because it's above standard usage or it's the way that their lease was written. But that hasn't really impacted our desire to want to overall lower utility costs, even if the tenant's covering some of those costs or not any of those costs. Because in general, we're still trying to meet a ton of compliance criterias out there. And when we do have a triple net lease where the tenant's paying for their portion of their their utilities, be it grossed up or not, it's important to us to again, it's kind of back to, it's in our DNA. We're a forward-looking, sustainable company. We have a sustainability team that has company goals and our ESG strategy that impact down to all of us. And so there's differences, but I don't think it really changes the way that we look at energy savings across the portfolio, regardless of the lease type.
Great. Sal, anything that you want to add on that one?
Look, in a triple net situation, in its most perfect form, every dollar that is spent on, it was called the CAM or the operating, the building is passed back through to the tenant, right? Unless there's some exclusionary wording. To the tenant, their rent is a combination of operating expenses and rent, right? They look at the whole thing, right? We may look at it separately. We may say, okay, I get net rent in this triple net situation, and here are my operating expenses that I get fully recovered. But to a tenant, they bundle it together, right? So it behooves us to keep costs down, even though it's a direct pass through. It still behooves to keep costs down because in the tenant's eyes, it's all rent. So if I can keep operating expenses down in a triple net situation, I have a better opportunity, hopefully, to get some increases in net rent at renewal or in the future. In a base year situation or a full service lease situation, it's a little bit different there. In that case there, you want to just curb those annual increases as much as you can, to be able to absorb things that are more volatile,
Mhm.
like an air conditioning system blowing up or something like that, where you got to spend money. So you want to be able to control what you can control in those situations. And also, again, at renewal or new leasing, that can determine the amount of net rent in this full service situation. So it always is a good idea to keep all expenses low wherever you can, to increase net rent one way or the other. So
Well, and I'll
That's
even
great.
add to that, I would imagine that you agree with this, that just even over the last 10 or 15 years, we've found that not that we were ever trying to, not share pertinent information, but tenants have become a ton more sophisticated.
Absolutely.
A lot of them have their own sustainability programs internally, and that has a lot of influence on which buildings they want to lease from and
Yeah,
who they want to do business with. So the tenants in general have just become a lot more sophisticated.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, we have clients as well that, have tenants looking for direct, net zero leases in some cases as well. And so, providing that visibility into the tenants, into the data, is something that we also do in some cases, and is super valuable for them to understand, the operations and just what impact is being made.
So I want to touch on one other question that just came in through the Q&A, which I think is an important one. And we've mentioned about increases in utility rates, but at the same time, we've also seen an overall push for electrification, which is those two things can be at odds, right?
Yeah.
So you've got on one hand, electricity rates going up, things like demand, not just your overall usage, while in some cases energy use may be going up, moving away from other energy sources, natural gas, steam, depending on where you are, obviously. So how do you all balance those two things where you may be trying to push towards more electric, energy, like electrical systems, energy like driven systems, but at the same time, you may be now hammered with a demand charge that is absolutely, bananas. So how do you balance those two things, and how does having access to this kind of data affect that? And sorry to not call anyone out specifically, so I'll pick at random. Sal, if you seem to be having the biggest response to this, so what comes to
It's
mind for
hard.
you?
Look, from an office standpoint, right? I haven't seen the increase in demand. And when I say demand, I mean usage, right?
Sure.
Like I said, that was kind of curtailed a few years ago when we dealt with the low-hanging fruit and we got things in business and the whole nine yards. So all of our increases in dollars have to do with the cost.
Hmm.
Right? If anything, I'm starting to see what may be a decrease in overall usage of buildings from before, and that's simply due to having less computers under desks, less copiers, fax machines, all those types of things that are in buildings. Um, yeah, the cost factor. I don't know how much I can speak to like the electrification issue. It's in the office world, we're really not seeing it. But what I understand in the news and through information is that it's just causing a lot of pressure on demand and capacity. And capacity is going through, it is an issue because we don't have it. But so I'll defer back to you guys, maybe know a little bit more about that than I do. But on our side, I don't. It's just in the cost factors. That's really where we're getting hit.
Hmm.
Yeah. We're seeing it pretty heavily in our markets, especially up here in the Pacific Northwest. Just the way that our I won't go into too many details about the way that our grid works, but we use a lot of hydropower, and some of those dams are on long-term ground leases, which are coming up here either now or in the next 10 years. And so there is a big push, and there's some codes that have passed in our markets regarding the replacement of failed gas boilers or failed gas hot water heaters. And so a couple things that, I'm not sure that every market has some of these programs out there, but we had a gas boiler that we wanted to replace. The we couldn't put an electric boiler in to accommodate the same amount of heat that we needed out of the gas boiler with the way that the building was designed and the amount of power that the building had. However, if we changed out one of our large centrifugal chillers to a heat pump chiller and used heat recovery, we could make it work. And we provided that information to the utility provider, and the utility provider gave us a grant to help offset the costs. We only needed to replace the boiler. The chiller was only, 12 years old and had another 8 to 10 years of life expectancy on it. But we were able to get a grant to replace it with a heat pump chiller to offset the additional electricity usage that the boiler was going to bring in. So I know at least in our markets, there are some programs and incentives out there, but it takes a little bit of creativity. And that particular program, that wasn't necessarily something that was you can go find on their website. It was a program. It took, setting up some meetings, discussing it, getting an engineer involved. It took a lot of heavy lifting up front to get them to see the value of this, to be able to make it work.
Mhm. One follow-up question, kind of specific to the question that came in that this came from. As you guys are adding amenities to your buildings, maybe things like electric vehicle charging stations, do you guys see a increase in an overall electric use from systems such as that? And if so, what are you doing to try to address that?
Look, I'll tell you, I was of the thinking many years ago, that why do I need electric chargers in my buildings? I didn't put gas stations in, right? Um, but the reality is that is the reality. You need to have them at your building. So what was once a one or two off, electric charging station for marketing purposes, now we have 10, 20, 30 of them. Now the good thing is that we can measure every ounce of energy just coming off of that, right? We don't make money. There's not enough money to be made. It's about just covering costs. So that's our focus with that. I don't know yet what the demand result is. Meaning now that people are using this, we absolutely are using more energy in these buildings. I don't know how that's hurting our demand cost completely. I think, we're going to get there as we have this system in place, but it's only been about a year or so since we've had these increase in actual EV chargers. So we need to step back and say, all right, let's go back to 2021, 2022, when we really didn't have that many or only had a token amount. And now in 2025, where I have a dozen at every building, we can start seeing the difference. We can now overlay that needs to happen, I think is my answer. So
Yeah, I'm probably looking at actually trying to capture that data, if possible, as a separate stream, so you can look
absolutely.
at the overall building load alongside that to see what that direct impact is when you're setting those peaks.
Yeah, 100%.
Now,
Yeah.
I just wanted to touch on one thing that I think relates to what you're saying here, and you mentioned this at the top, but the sort of education element of, we've been working with you for a long time. You talked about how understanding your bills and how you're charged, versus how much you're using, I think is an important part of, a successful program like this, where the visibility is great and you guys are really, taking advantage of that, but it all, is rooted in the fact that you understand what it is that you're managing and what you need to be tackling, because you've sort of educated yourself, with the help of our advisory folks on a regular basis. And the property teams know, how they're billed and what, line items they need to be tackling and then how to go about that using the data. So just curious if you can touch on that education journey a little bit and, how important that's been.
I didn't hear, was that a question for Sal or me or both?
Yeah, both. If you want to take a Phil, go for it.
Yeah, we we put some pretty strict incentives around our operations and engineering and property managers when it came to utility tracking. And so we use the data that is in measurable, and we use a program called Cove. Some people have used Building Engines. It's our work order platform, and we have a section in there dedicated to all of our utility measures. Anything that gets put in there gets tracked that through that process in our work order systems. But with reading the utility bills and going through that, we do these kind of build the bench, trainings where we walk through with property teams to make sure they understand what they're looking at in their bill. Yes, there's the overall usage, but as we've seen here, the demand charge is what's taking 25-30% of the cost of the utility bill itself. And when we're looking at what's driving those demand charges, I think if you asked a property manager 10 years ago, how much was your bill? And they said, oh, it's $25,000. And you asked them, well, how much of that was related to usage? Because our power up here in the Pacific Northwest, is still relatively cheap compared to the rest of the country. It's obviously going up, but it's, cents per kilowatt hour, but the demand charge is what's really driving the overall cost. And I don't think a lot of people understood that once that demand charge is set for your billing period, that's what you pay for your entire billing period. If you have one bad day, one issue, like what Sal talked about earlier, where something turns on in the middle of the night that wasn't needed, and then it sets that demand rate for the rest of the month, even if you had 29 flawless days of utility operation, that one day could screw up your entire month and how much you're paying. So just describing that, putting trainings together, showing examples of a building that operated one month really efficiently and one month with one or two bad days, and just showing the overall impact of what that had on the utility bill. And if that happened 12 months over, what that could look like on an annual, monetized savings. So it's just, again, ingrained in our DNA. We also do some training for our tenants as well. Like on Earth Day, a lot of our teams will put out a large monitor in the lobby and display our current usage. So they'll bring up measurable and they'll display it, and they'll have one of our property administrators or an engineer standing down there, and his tenants are sitting there waiting for the elevator, ask what it is. It's, hey, this is what the usage is of your guys' office space and of the office building. And we hand out a little swag gift or something just to get people to start asking questions. And some people walk right by it and get in the elevator and go up to their top floor and, you know, don't mind, but a lot of people follow up with emails and questions and how can we help? So it's training our staff, our internal staff, our employees, and then our tenants as well. And furthermore, it's, giving this information to ownership in quarterly and annual reports or asset managers so that they can see what it is we're looking at and why we think it's important.
Yeah.
One thing I just want to touch on real quick. Sorry, Sal, you mentioned the where you guys are in a lot of your properties in the Pacific Northwest, and talking about things like peak demand, and really for anyone listening there, depending on where you are, the demand can affect not just on the monthly level. You could be talking about in some utilities maybe dealing with what's actually called a ratchet, which may last up to 11 months. And then you start talking about, capacity charges and peak load contribution. And there's, we tend to think about a kilowatt saved is a dollar saved, but there's other ways that you're looking at your bill, Sal, to the way you've talked about digging into your bills over time and understanding how your operations are really affecting it. And there's a lot more to it.
Yeah, I mean, with both of what you said, I could talk about this section for about an hour because I feel like I'm always learning something new, and I think everybody should. You're talking about going back to the old days when if you're looking at your simple variance report and said, "Oh, the electric cost this month was X and next month it was Y," and the response was, "Oh, we had a warmer month or something." And I remember my response was, "Oh, okay," until you realize, well, wait a minute, what's the data say? It was actually like 2 degrees colder, and you get away from this guessing game, right? But you got to want to get away from the guessing game, which means you got to want to dig into the numbers and you got to want to dig into it. I am not an expert. There's still many parts of the bill I don't understand. But I think what I'm seeing is that it's no longer simple, right? It's no longer simple as how much power am I using? You said every dollar, every kilowatt saved is not a dollar saved. You could go ahead and have lower usage overall, but if you're getting killed on the demand side, it doesn't matter anymore. Um,
Hmm.
these are the things that we need to continue learning, and I think it's important. I think when you teach your staff to look into this and not just guess why something has changed, you empower them and they become smarter and they now are asking better questions because that's what it's happened to me. I don't think I've too much learned more as I've learned how the biggest thing I've learned how to do is ask better questions and understand what's happening. And I'll continue to learn through this process. And there's still some ways to go, especially because said the generation side has kind of curtailed a little bit in terms of dollars. What's going up is the transmission side. That's
Hmm.
and that's not dollar for dollar. That's
No.
that's a whole different metric going on there, trying to understand what's happening. So
Yeah, I would
That's
also
that's
encourage
great.
people to I would encourage people to engage their utility provider and utility company. If you've got a utility advisor, like that's what they call them for our utility markets, and they will sit down with you and they'll look at this data that we have through measurable, and give you some, tips, things to look at, and go through your bill if you haven't done that. At least in our market, I know most of our utility companies are more than happy to jump on a Teams call or even meet in person at your facility. And it's in their best interest to keep their grid reliable, which the best way that they can do that outside of their maintenance and operations is to be able to predict how much usage they're going to have every day. So they're a lot of times willing to work with you on how to better read your usage in your bill and what you can do in your property.
So I want to keep an eye on time here, but so as we kind of start to wind down, you guys touched a little bit on kind of what energy management looked like in the past, what it's looking like more now. A lot of it seems to be around education, visibility into the data, asking better questions, which I thought was great. Uh, what you know, as like you guys have shifted along this journey, how where you go, your teams go from primarily focusing on the quick wins and the low-hanging fruit. Phil, you mentioned earlier that there's still things that are being found that fall into that bucket, but what do you find that your teams or you guys are focusing on as you move in along this journey? Sal, starting with you, what's changed?
I think a lot, but let's in its most simplest form, if I go back 20 years, it was all about how much money I'm spending, how much money was my electric bill. It was about the dollars, right? Total dollars, without breaking down transmission versus, supply and all that kind of stuff. And everything was on a per square foot basis too, and still is in our business. I have changed over the years to now when I look at a building's efficiency, I no longer look at it on a per square foot basis in terms of dollars, right? Because that can be wildly different in different markets. I could be paying 20 cents or 25 cents a kilowatt hour in New Jersey versus, 14 cents or 12 cents a kilowatt hour in Pennsylvania. And you're literally, a mile away from each other. You're right across the river. I now look at things on how many kilowatt hours I'm using per square foot. Like
Mhm.
that is something now that I'm really focusing on more than ever before. I'm even looking at the way I gross up buildings different than ever. In the past, it was usually like a 30-70 fixed variable kind of split or what have you. Now it's not like that. Every building is becoming different because of the tenant use. So the biggest change for me is instead of looking at it from the dollars perspective first, like as head on, now I look at from the building use and type of building head on. From there, the dollars will come depending on the state you're in, the city you're in, your municipality, or whatever that may be. So,
Yeah, understanding where the building is, what type of building it is, and it makes sense because it's not just, what should a random building be in dollars per square foot, but what should this building be in terms of
what
a
should
UI?
this building be? It's about getting rid of these old assumptions, right? For years, we had certain assumptions in our head and how a building operates, how it should be grossed up, if that's what you're doing. All these like old school assumptions that actually aren't really worth much today. As I
Hmm.
mentioned earlier, the way a tenant uses their space today is very different in terms of energy use than they used it just 20 years ago. The equipment's different. The amount of people in the space is different. The lighting is different. Air conditioning is more efficient. Well, because of all of that, that factor in the actual use of an office building is less, right? More of it is on the central plant or the CAM or the common area or than it is that on the tenant usage. And you need to bring that into your thinking and into your mathematics and into your finance.
And how about you, Phil? As you guys have moved, especially as you've ingrained these kind of things, these kind of solutions into your operations, what are you trying to get your teams to focus on to go a little deeper?
Yeah, for us, it's the push has been, and we haven't been completely successful on this, but it's certainly my vision is predictive maintenance.
Mm.
So trying to figure out what is happening at a slow level. We've talked about, 3 or 4 times on this call, the low-hanging fruit. Our buildings have variable frequency drives on the equipment. They have LED lights. They have all of the bells and whistles that originally lowered utilities. But now what we see is, if we see a building start over a weekend or at night or those spikes, those are very easy for us to pinpoint what caused it. But a very, simple dialed down example of this would be, your supplier temperature was 54.5 one day and then 55 and then 55.5, and you can slowly see something starting to happen with that piece of equipment. and it's a slow turn, but it can have larger implications on both comfort and utility. So it's kind of
Hmm.
predictive maintenance. What are we seeing change over the course of days, weeks, and months versus that one easy to, navigate or locate spike in the middle of the night. So I'd say predictive maintenance is probably a big one for us. And then like everything, when VFDs first came out and, they were 6 feet tall and they cost, $50,000. And now you can get a VFD on the shelf at Granger for $500 or $600 and just slightly larger than my laptop. I think the same thing is starting to come down with different technologies for envelope. Envelope has always been the most challenging one for us. It's much easier to convince an owner, an asset manager, to put some money in infrastructure into replacing a pump, a motor, or VFD or light fixture than it is to address a larger concern, which is leakage and envelope. So we're
Hmm.
trying to figure out ways, solutions, and technologies that are out there that can improve that for us. Um, Knowing that right now the return on investment on that is typically outside of our hold term in an office building. But it's a pain to sit on this side of the table and have these compliance fines and deadlines that are in there. But it also is something that, it kind of guides our hand to make some of these deferred upgrades to properties that we have put off just because the return on investment hasn't always been there.
That's great. This has been a fantastic discussion. Just to keep an eye on time, I want to turn it over to Mike as we're winding this down to talk a little bit about just how measurable can help you guys, learn more, understand your data, and maybe, dig in a little bit more with this. So I'll turn it over to you, Mike, real quick.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think for those folks who are looking to get a little more insight into how we might be able to help, we've put together a custom savings report that we can share with you with a little bit of information around your utility data if we get access to utility bills. And so if you're an existing, measurable customer where we have your utility information, we can put this together for you now. If you're not, we've actually also rolled out a free portion of the Measurable platform where you can actually ingest your utility data via Energy Star Portfolio Manager or bulk upload, and we can help take that data and provide you some insights around not only the potential opportunity with leveraging the optimized solution, but also look at some of those things you just mentioned, Phil, around regulatory compliance, where you might be exposed to fine risk. We can help you, look at benchmarking your performance, and also look at, potential opportunities for automating data collection on the utility side. So there's a lot of useful tools through that free solution, and I encourage everybody on the call to go take a look at that, see how it might benefit you, and from there it would also allow us to give you some insights, all at no cost, to see how we might be able to help you going forward. So. I think it's been great to hear from Sal and Phil on all of how they're leveraging the platform, and we'd love to hear from anybody directly. If you have any questions, please reach out and let us know.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Sal. Thank you, Mike.
Welcome.
Thank you to everyone who joined today and all the great questions. I apologize if we couldn't get to them all, but we will be following up afterwards. And if you want to learn about more, reach out to sales@measurabl.com or use the QR code that's embedded in the slides, which we will be sending out along with a recording of the meeting. So thank you, everyone.
Great.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
You guys. Thanks.